This whole behavior, this lowering of expectations from 2 years ago is deeply alarming. We have an entire cottage industry that relies on the DOJ running out the clock, first with the Mueller probe, now with January 6th, also with the stolen documents held at Mar-a-Lago that we don't hear anything about anymore. They aid in these reputational rehab tours of people like Kushner and Ivanka. They ignore the fact that Kushner and Ivanka's lawyer, Jamie Gorelick, is Garland's, best friend, mentor, and overseeing the January 6th committee, therefore leaving Gaslit Nation as your sole source on, why the hell nobody is being indicted. We have informed speculation. We don't have, all of the information that we should, because this is a administration that obfuscates and lies. But, I hope people look back 2 years ago at how they felt and what they expected. Because I think that if you knew that 2 years later, Bannon, Stone, Flynn, Trump, Kushner, and, all of these other open operators, recruiting foot soldiers, working with the Oath Keepers, working with the Proud Boys, would not just be roaming free, but would be, working with Trump as he runs for office again after even more crimes were committed in that 2-year interim period, including the Mar-a-Lago documents, including more revelations about Kushner's financial crimes. Merrick Garland is not working for the American public. I don't think Merrick Garland is really working for the United States. I think he's working for a variety of intelligence and corporate interests, maybe some of which are American and some of which are not. I think, as I wrote about they knew that that one great weapon of autocracy is time, is running out the clock and letting that change public perception. Because initially, after January 6th, the entire country saw this as an attack, wanted indictment, wanted impeachment, had no doubts that Trump was lying. Something like, I don't know, it was over 90% of the country viewed Biden's win as legitimate. They were not questioning it. And then 2 years later, of course, you have a large portion, I think the majority of the Republican Party, viewing Biden as illegitimate, and a lot of people beginning to question, well, was this really an attack? Like, if this is really an attack, Garland and others would do something. And then there's this complicated situation where, we now know, but we also knew back then, that the Secret Service, members of the Capitol Police, certainly members of the FBI, either looked the other way and allowed this attack to happen, or were involved in it in various capacities. This is why there was so many shakeups in personnel within the Trump administration, within the DOD, for example, right before it. So we know that there is internal institutional complicity. And, a lot of times the right wing will bring this up as in, they'll say like January 6th was a false flag. The FBI did it. And, I dismiss the false flag part of that because we all watched the planning of this attack online. That's why we were able to do a Capitol attack preview special on Gaslit Nation. But the role the FBI played, that there are, members that were guilty of involvement on some sort of level, I think that's a totally worthwhile question. The role Republican criminal elites played, people like Ginny Thomas, for example, that's also a completely worthwhile question, and one that notably the January 6th committee did not ask, and they left it out of their report. And, Liz Cheney, who is praised and heralded as this great arbiter of justice and democracy, is the person who buries these crimes. And that's why she was installed on there, because they don't want to look at the broader context of criminality. They don't want people looking at other elections that revolved around court proceedings and threats, like the 2000 election in which, Roger Stone was leading riots, to try to elevate George Bush into office successfully in 2000, along with, of course, her father, Dick Cheney. At heart, they want historical context to be removed from analysis of the situation. And that's why this week I saw so many articles getting tweeted from people that were like, can you believe this? We finally figured out because of the January 6th committee that Charles Flynn was involved in the attack. And then you look at the date on the article, and it is indeed from January, but it's from January 2021, because we knew all of this immediately. Like, all of this information that's being presented as a revelation was brought up either before the attack took place, during the time the attack took place, or afterward. And it's only the lack of action that has left people confused about when exactly agencies that are supposed to enforce accountability came across all of these bits of information. And it's truly, it's one of the most disheartening, depressing, and ominous things that I've seen the entire time we've run this show. And you should go in your mind about all the things we cover. We cover transnational organized crime. We cover Jeffrey Epstein. We cover Kremlin operations, Putin's war in Ukraine. The reaction of our government to a violent attempted coup with an attack on the Capitol that left people dead, the way that they have shirked their responsibility, that they've abandoned the American people, that they've abandoned, anyone who is supposed to protect our country, including other members of Congress, including the Capitol Police who did try to do their jobs. It's absolutely disgraceful. And it's going hand in hand with other, acts of abandonment, the way they've abandoned vulnerable people, or everyone, but especially people with disabilities and pre-existing conditions and so forth in the pandemic. That they lie about that too, that they say the pandemic is over and there's nothing more they can do, and they're going to take away, free testing and masks, and, they'll ignore the fact that our hospitals are overflowing. Like, that is the tenor of this administration. It's move forward because we're turning our backs on you. That should be their motto, because that is what they did with January 6th. And now I believe with the GOP House, which we will get to in a minute, which, of course doesn't exist, because as we record this at 1:30 Central Time on Wednesday, there is no House of Representatives. No one's been seated. But if there were one, there would be no January 6th committee anymore, because that door has been closed. They have released their report. They're no longer investigating it. They've passed it along to Merrick Garland. Merrick Garland passed it along to Jack Smith. And they're just running out the clock again. And Andrea and I are never going to get past this. We're going to continue to analyze not just the events of that day, because they're important, but the aftermath and how these crises are buried, because this is such a pattern. They tried to bury illicit acts in the 2016 election. They tried to bury, in our lifetimes, the 2008 financial collapse and who benefited from that. The Iraq War, built on a legal pretext. 9/11, whose committee is extremely similar in the way it operated as the January 6th committee, where they're omitting key facts, they're limiting the time frame, they're having people, who are either witnesses or participants in the attacks guide what kind of knowledge is conveyed. Very shameful. And then, I think like the real mother lode here is Iran-Contra. So much of what is happening with this reminds me of Iran-Contra, where you have a very large, complicated, transnational, and truly horrific crime committed by the state or with the acquiescence of the state that gradually fades from public consciousness, and to the point that a lot of folks, who are younger especially, they don't even know what it is. And older folks can't remember what it was. And a lot of players from that are there today. So anyway, lots of lessons to learn, but we'll post some links of our initial coverage of January 6th from 2021, the night before, the day after, our first full-length episode after, which I believe was 2 hours long, in which we warned you, they're going to rewrite this. They're going to lie to you about this. They're going to downplay it. They're going to fail to prosecute. We did not think they would do as bad a job as they did, honestly. Like, both Andrea and I were more optimistic that they're not going to ignore a violent coup, because of course a failed coup is a dress rehearsal, and everyone knows that. Anyone who has the faintest knowledge of the history of authoritarian regimes knows that. And so you have to wonder, well, why are they doing nothing? Why are they fine with this? We know why the Republicans are fine with it. We know why the Trump supporters are fine with it. You have to ask, well, why is the DOJ, the FBI, and a large portion of the Democrats in Congress fine with it as well?
One thing that really pisses me off about the utter lack of accountability for the attempted violent coup and all the coup organizers running around, for the most part, like the majority of them are, they had a freaking war room in the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. for like a week or weeks leading up to what they all had in mind, what they were all organizing, which was, again, a violent attempted coup. One of the many things that pisses me off about this is that my kids are going to come of age when they're finally, God willing, middle age, and they're going to have some horrific Trumpian politician do something horrific and be shocked out of their minds. And then they're going to have to learn, oh, but honey, there was this guy named Trump who walked. There was Iran-Contra. There was Watergate. And they're going to see like this, just like so many Americans became experts in Iran-Contra and Watergate because of Trump. It's just going to get passed on to a new generation, seeing another horrific crime being carried out and no one doing anything to stop it, and realizing it's part of this larger American story of corruption and utter lack of accountability. And so, why are they doing this? Sarah touched already on that why of it, and it's because corruption is an industry. There's a revolving door. Louis Freeh ran the FBI, and now he's a Russian mafia consigliere. So that's why they're all cashing in on it. The simple answer is always money and power. It's that simple. There's even a line in The Godfather where they talk where they're talking about which journalists and politicians they own. It's that. But Sarah and I, we launched our show pointing out uncomfortable truths, and we really were planning on walking through fire in order to do that. And we didn't expect to make any friends. And we're really shocked as hell that we made any friends along the way, as can happen on these journeys. But a lot of the um, collective agreement out there among a lot of popular so-called resistance Twitter accounts and podcasts seems to be pretty firmly in, maybe shaking a fist at Merrick Garland every now and then, but largely getting over it, largely moving on. And we're the ones that look, I don't know how we look to them. They try to ignore us. They try to like snark at us for not moving on, because how the hell can you move on from a violent attempted coup of your democracy? This whole environment that we're under, intellectually, career-wise, just the pressures, the social pressure, the isolation, it reminds me so, so much of what George Orwell and his wife went through. His wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, who was an extremely brilliant poet in her own right, who basically helped her husband become the great artist that we all remember him for. If it weren't for Eileen, we would not have gotten Animal Farm in 1984. And because of misogyny for generations, she's been long overlooked by a lot of the leading Orwell scholars. And even some of his friends during the time, they didn't understand. There's one good friend of Orwell's that saw a remarkable transformation in Orwell's writing and thought process when he married Eileen in 1936. Keep in mind, Eileen was a woman who had a degree in English and studied under the great J.R.R. Tolkien and other masters at the time in literature, living legends in literature. And then she went on to study child psychology and the power of imagination and the power of children's intelligence. Okay, so literature and children. What was Orwell's great masterwork? A children's book, Animal Farm. That book was deliberately written for children. In the years that he was coming up with the idea for Animal Farm, she was the one that used to come up with silly stories about their barn animals when they're trying to drop out of society and make a go of it living on a little farm together. She would make up these operatic, funny stories about their animals, including Muriel the goat, who appears in Animal Farm. And when Orwell wanted to write some scathing essay blasting everyone for worshiping Uncle Joe Stalin and communism and the Soviet Union workers' paradise mythology, she was like, instead of an essay, be poetic about it, put it in a story, like a novel, a short story, and that, of course, gave rise to Animal Farm and so on. So that's just a little tiny look at how incredible this couple was, how George Orwell was a band name, And when they got back from fighting fascists on their honeymoon in the Spanish Civil War, where Orwell was shot through the neck, and he and his wife are being literally hunted by Stalinist agents, and they're literally being terrorized, and they had to flee the country with their lives while their friends were being kidnapped, tortured, arrested, killed by Stalin's agents, and they were going to be next, and they had to flee the country with their lives. And when they get back to the UK and they see that everyone back at home in England is buying all of the pro-communist propaganda, that Stalin is on the side of the good guys in Spain, that Stalin is our ally, that the communists are great. And they're like, no, 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 Stalin is a maniac. Stalin is carrying out the purges, the show trials in Russia, but in the Spanish Civil War. Orwell and his wife were gaslit. It was so severe that one of their comrades who were with them in Spain, when he returned to England, this guy was being hunted by young communists who literally believed he was a fascist traitor to the communist cause. They were physically trying to hunt down this guy and harm him. And Orwell had to speak up and defend him. And Orwell was writing all sorts of pieces trying to explain to people what was really going on in Spain, and getting so many hit pieces directed at him, so many even personal attacks. And then he tries to clear up the record, and he and Eileen get to work on their big book on Spain, Homage to Catalonia. And they put it all down on record about what was really going on. And they're going to set the record straight, and they're going to fight for the lives of their friends who were still stuck in prison back in Spain, who were hunted by the Stalinists and so on. And they're going to clear up all this disinformation. And they put it out in this book, and no one wanted the book. No one wanted the book. The book barely sold. And when he would try to publish these pieces about what was really going on in Spain, he was directly met, from his own usual publisher and literary editors, all sorts of editors out there in the world. They would not touch his stories on Spain because it went against the prevailing orthodoxy. It went against the British establishment, which was largely sympathetic to the communists. The UK was making money with the Soviets. The British government had opened up normal relations with the Soviets. Even never mind, the Soviets would snatch British businessmen, British engineers, and hold them hostage, like they did Brittany Griner recently, the WNBA star, and so on. So Orwell and his wife Eileen were working in the same gaslighting that Sarah and I operate under. That's why I lose myself in studying history, like clinging on to historical mentors to try to be told that I'm not crazy. This has happened before. And if you're going to do this work, you just have to learn to be comfortable. It's never comfortable, of course, going up against powerful forces. And you just need a place to go, like your historical mentors, to remind you that this is not normal. Of course, this is not normal. And you just have to keep beating on with a public record and leaving behind a public record to show that yes, we do see what you're doing. We see it very clearly what you're doing. And today, Orwell's book on Spain, because when the war was going on, there's several books on Spain that were coming out. You had several pundits who were going on the cable news of the day, all the big fancy radio programs, and writing in the big fancy newspapers, being the voice of what's really going on in Spain. But the one book that survives from all these years from that time, that is still studied today, that is a trusted source, that has withstood the test of time, is, of course, the book that Orwell and Eileen wrote that came out of their honeymoon, Homage to Catalonia. So that's what we're doing. That's our big goal. And that's our tribute to the 2-year anniversary of January 6th and the violent attempted coup orchestrated by madmen, by corrupt criminals who are still walking free.